Welcome to another exciting episode of Deterrence Down Under, a podcast dedicated to Australia and the challenges of deterrence in the Indo-Pacific region. Deterrence Down Under is part of the National Institute for Deterrence Studies podcasting network, where we strive to promote peace, foster strategic stability, and help you to think deterrence. Just a friendly reminder that the opinions expressed by our hosts and guests are their own and don't necessarily reflect any institution with which they may be affiliated. G'day from Canberra. We hope you enjoyed the show. Welcome to Deterrence Down Under. I'm your host, Carl Rhodes.
Hey, I'm Christine Leah.
Hey, welcome back to Deterrence Down Under. We're really happy to be back. Our producer, Kimberly, it's good to see her again. And with the support of NIDS, we're back on the mic, tackling strategic challenges from an oceanic lens. So today, Christine and I are unpacking why public debate matters, not just for defense and national security, but for deterrence and alliances as well. So we'll start with a little bit of deterrence news from Australia. Today's deterrence news zeroes in on what you might call an unconsummated alliance relationship between Prime Minister Albanese and President Trump. It's a partnership that's played out so far through the press releases and phone calls, not through in-person diplomacy. And Australia right now is writing big checks to the Pentagon under AUKUS, helping to fuel America's shipbuilding industry. But that deal, which is really at the center of Australia's national defense strategy, is now under review by Bridge Colby and others in the Pentagon, just to make sure it fits the administration's America First agenda. So any face-to-face meeting between the two leaders is really going to be high stakes, especially for those of us here in Australia and for the leaders in Canberra. After multiple cancellations, Albanese finally has a new date on the books, October 20th, a sit-down at the White House. So there's alignment on some issues, like pushing back against China, but there's also real points of potential friction. Australia's recognition of a Palestinian state, Trump's tariffs, including on Australia, climate policy, and Australia's support for a more restrictive climate policy, and defense spending here in Australia that falls well below U.S. expectations. So to date, President Trump hasn't directed the same kind of ire towards Australia that he's unleashed on Europe. And that's what really makes this meeting compelling. Is it going to be just a cordial reaffirmation of the ties between the two nations? Or is Trump going to turn on his blowtorch and torch the leadership in Canberra and call for big changes? It's an open question, and we're looking forward to that October 20 date. So setting aside alliance politics for a moment, that's a big enough mess and a hard question to address. Let's swing back to today's focus, debate around defense and national security topics. So Christine, you were just in the U.S. You're one of those people who travels for deterrence events. How was your trip?
Hey, Carl. It's great to be with you again. Glad to be back. Deterrence Down Under. No, it was really good. Well, look, I'm a nerd, so I said to folks, they're like, "Oh, what are you doing while you're here?" And I'm like, "Well, I'm on holidays. I'm writing a book." They're like, "Oh, wow. Okay, you need a hobby."
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I travel for pinball tournaments. You travel for deterrence events. I mean, like, we're both nerds in our own way. Let's face it.
Hell yeah. No, it's great. No, it was a wonderful trip. I like to go to the US at least once a year. I met with some of our wonderful colleagues and friends that we've had on the show from Heritage, American Enterprise Institute, National Defense University, Deterrence, NIDS, our own folks from NIDS. Yeah, it was really good. Had some really interesting chats with people about kind of their thoughts about the future of extended nuclear deterrence in our region, the Asia-Pacific region, what Americans and Japanese and South Koreans are thinking about the future of nuclear strategy, arms control, and so forth. Yeah, it was really enriching. And, you know, there's brilliant folks in the US who are very willing to have quite candid conversations about these topics, you know, whilst really quite candid conversations, which is really enlightening, both from sort of a policy policy perspective, but also military perspective, but also like kind of like the more conceptual perspective, which is what I enjoy, like concepts of strategy, like, oh, what's the future of alliances? What's the future of arms control? And so forth, looking at this kind of new, quote unquote, new strategic setting with the rise and expansion of China as a bigger nuclear power in the modern era. Yeah, it was really good. I had some great food. Oh my gosh. Mexican food in America is so good.
That is the one thing I miss since coming to Canberra. Real good down home Mexican food and Tex-Mex food. So good. Did you make it to Omaha? I mean, I know you were trying to go to the Stratcom Deterrence Symposium. That didn't seem to happen.
Yeah, no, thank you for reminding me. Yeah, so initially I'd planned to do my, as I like to call it, my annual migration to Omaha for the Stratcom Deterrence Symposium, which has been going on for, 15 years?
I think I saw 15 years online, so yeah.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because I might have been on a panel there this year with a colleague of ours, and then it got cancelled, and I'm like, you can't cancel Stratcom. What?
Damn.
It got canceled.
Stratcom isn't canceled. Just talking to people like Christine is canceled in a public environment. No. Fortunately, they still talk to you one-on-one, which is important.
No, I'm grateful for that. No, it's I do love our American colleagues, but it's really interesting this what's happening. As we've discussed, a whole bunch of conferences that we, I guess, have taken for granted, perhaps, have been cancelled in the United States. It's perplexing, but also interesting, and I guess there are thoughts around that in the current administration. But as you and I have discussed, a bunch of conferences being cancelled. Your thoughts?
Yeah, and it's not just on the U.S. side. Like U.S. participation in events here in Australia has been cancelled too. So, look, I was just at the Williams Foundation seminar. That's one of the bigger seminars where they discuss defense issues and the role of defense industry and what are the challenges facing defense and are we ready to fight tonight? That was the topic of this symposium. And they had a bunch of U.S. guests scheduled to show up from DoD, not a bunch, but some. And they canceled. They canceled out. They left a gap in the discussion, and it leaves a gap in kind of the public discussion about what's the role of the alliance, what is the role of the United States in terms of helping ensure security here in the Indo-Pacific and the state of deterrence. Also, U.S. reps weren't allowed to show up in recent Track 1.5 discussions. So these are not official discussions, but semi-official discussions where they bring in some experts and some government officials to speak off the record. That was part of the U.S.-Australia Indo-Pacific Deterrence Dialogue in August. And the U.S. Officials canceled out last minute because of all this shutdown on discussions with think tanks, academics, conferences that the U.S. is performing. And sources here called it kind of a shock, narrow-minded, self-defeating even. So, I mean, it has a real impact on the alliance, don't you think, Christine?
Yeah, it's those are really great points, Carl. I'd agree with you. Kind of as a kind of academic perspective, I can understand a hesitancy to engage with internationals, but also like Stratcom, for example, has prided itself. It is my impression on being a forum for exchanging ideas between allies and friendly nations, and you can see that in the countries that do attend Stratcom. Like there aren't any, you don't tend to see Russian or Chinese academics at Stratcom. Let's put it that way. But it's I guess it's kind of that. It's an intangible benefit, but it is tangible because you're having these very concrete discussions and reassurance activities between the United States and its allies. Yeah, no, it's such a shame. And our friend Bob Peters was supposed to come out for a 1.5 to Canberra alongside some other people from CSBA with Pack Forum. It's such a shame, and yeah, we miss out. Australians miss out on having discussions around core concepts of strategy and deterrence and extended deterrence. It's a big shame, yeah.
Yeah, and while the public isn't attending these events, or some of the public is reading the reports from these events, and that information that goes to academics and others working in these fields eventually gets diffused out to the public, and it's important to understand what's the role of the alliance in order to maintain public support, because that's what it's all about. It's about national security for all of us on both sides of the Pacific, right?
Absolutely. So when's your next trip to the US, Carl?
So I was in the U.S. for a strategic dialogue with the National Strategic Defense or National Strategic Research Institute, NSRI. So it's a Stratcom affiliated, university affiliated research center, UARC. So I was there. When was I there? It was like June, I believe. It was in Honolulu. It was very expensive, I will say that, compared to Australia. But a good event. It included folks from Australia, folks from Korea, folks from Japan, and we were talking about nuclear deterrence, and specifically deterrence against tactical nuclear use in the Indo-Pacific. Really interesting. I'll call it a workshop. It wasn't quite a war game because we didn't really play out moves, but it was how would you react to this kind of situation occurring? Really interesting event, and really interesting to hear the perspectives of different sides. So I got to play partially as an Australian player and partially as a US player. And let's just say that others were far more willing to use US nuclear weapons than the US was in the game. But anyway, leave it at that because they're still working on the report for that. But let's move back to Australia and the state of public debate here in Australia and in Canberra. The National Defense Strategy says specifically the concept of national defense, a coordinated whole of government and whole of nation approach that harnesses all arms of national power to defend Australia and advance our interests. So that's kind of the goal of the most recent defense strategy, is this whole of nation approach. So where do we stand on this whole of nation approach? Where is the state of public debate, Christine? What is the phrase that you hear every time you go to a public event involving some discussion of our strategic environment?
Oh, that's a great question, Carl. It's really interesting. This came up a lot in some of my talks with our American friends. It's really interesting. I feel, having done sort of the PhD thing over 10 years ago, and my impression is there were much more robust discussions in the public. I had lunch with one of my professors and mentors yesterday, Hugh White, saying sort of, he's not a popular figure necessarily in Canberra, unfortunately, because he does.
I have his essay right here.
Yes, excellent. Thank you. Yes, go Hugh. Because he does contest, so government in general, he does contest government thinking, regardless of who's in power. And I think that's a great asset. It is good because that is contributing to the national intellect, national debate. If we don't question government thinking, then where's our intellect, our national intellect, our national intellectual capacity? So I think it's a great shame when people do criticize people like Hugh White, who are, you don't have to agree with them, but they are presenting ideas to engage with, which is not something I've noticed quite a significant, not downfall, but decrease in the last decade in Australia? I mean, Carl, you've been in Australia for a little bit now. I mean, how have you seen things during your time here, and coming to Australia as an American?
Yeah. So I mean, look, in the U.S., things like the national security strategy and national military strategy specifically call out, who are the threats. It names names. It says, this country is a threat. Russia and China are major threats to U.S. power. Iran, North Korea, others are potential threats in certain regional areas. So, I mean, that happens. Here in Australia, we have a little bit of I'll call it the Voldemort, problem, which is he who should not be named is causing us to be in the worst strategic environment we've been in since World War II, right? But this gets in the way of we need a whole of nation approach. How do we create a whole of nation approach without really talking about the problem and addressing it straight on and saying, here's the threat, here are some of the concerns, here's where we need to watch for. I think kind of the first place I really started to see a bit of it was this recent release of information about threats to cyber systems coming from China, and secure your routers and secure your computer systems, because there are threats out there and people who wish to do us harm and collect information about us. So that's one way in which we need to start thinking whole of nation, which is, people who are working cyber issues here claim we're at war. Well, how are we at war? How does the public have to worry about us being at war? How do we need to address this problem? What do we need to watch out for? Because if we don't know, then we can't act, right? So it gets to how do we think about that? And Chief of Army Lieutenant General Simon Stewart gave a really interesting closing at his Chief of Army Symposium, and he talked about a number of issues. But one of the things he really emphasized, I'm going to use his quote here. He said the Army has a requirement to, quote, double down, particularly when it comes to trust, and particularly when it comes to telling our story. That is communicating with the society we serve, communicating with the government of the day, and communicating with our colleagues and partners across institutions. And this part of why does a military exist, right? A military should exist to secure our national interests, and that comes to serving the people, and that comes to letting them know what you're doing and why you're doing it. I think that's a really important part of the story.
No, I totally agree, Carl. I couldn't agree more. It's very interesting. Indeed, governments have liked to say, we live in the most dangerous strategic times of our time, and we need to support the rules-based global order. Well, without actually naming any countries. And personally, I can see a logic there, but it does not help with what one might call the social narrative or the social license, if we're using constructivist terms, in our theory about how do you sell something like AUKUS, which costs a lot of money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, why are we spending all this money? Why are we putting national effort into defense things? And I had the real honor of speaking next to Simon Sinek, who is a organizational management thinker and a trainer of leaders, and he became pretty famous with a TED Talk and a book that's called Start With Why. And he centers on this golden circle about how inspiring leaders speak, which is let's talk through how AUKUS got announced. AUKUS was announced, by leaders that said, we're going to build these nuclear subs, and we're going to build them across the nations, and we're going to have Australia get these nuclear powered subs, not nuclear armed subs, and we're going to do it because the strategic environment's really bad. So this is the opposite of how Simon Sinek says you should argue with things. He says that inspiring leaders and inspiring organizations start with why, which is what is the purpose that's driving the organization? What's the fundamental reason for its existence? And then go to the how, and then go to the what. So, probably a better way to go about this argument as to why we need AUKUS, which is China is coming to dominate the Indo-Pacific, and we want to continue to live in a free and rules-based order world. And that's the why, right? And so, what do we need to support that why? AUKUS is one piece of that. We need to secure our maritime lanes of communication. And to do that, we need nuclear subs. That is a much more compelling argument than we're buying nuclear subs, and this is why. It's starting with the why and putting that at the core of your analysis. And look, I try to do this. I learned a lot from Simon and learned a lot as a leader of organizations and learned a lot as a parent, to tell you the truth. Both Nikki and I, whenever Esme, does something wrong here, our 3-year-old, you sit her down on the stair. And I always start with, I'm sitting you down here because what you were doing wasn't safe. I start with the why, and I want you to be safe, like that's how I think as a parent, rather than you were doing this and that's why I'm punishing you. I start with the why. So that's my little lesson of, deterrence and parenting and how they interact somehow.
Oh, I love that, Carl. That's beautiful. And like every kid wants to know why.
Exactly. I mean, she hasn't quite gotten to the stage where she's asking why about everything. Why this, why that? She does ask what a lot, but that's good. But it's really important because, as we were talking about, debate is really healthy. It's necessary, right? Not forget the parenting part. Let's talk about deterrence and improving national policy. Getting everyone on board is important, but also a debate as to, are we on the right path, is important. And, this is not just my view. The phrase debate is healthy and necessary appears in the Farghese report, which Australia ran a independent review of funding for strategic policy associated things here. And it said debate is healthy and necessary, even when it's uncomfortable. It helps improve things. It helps improve national security because it brings about a kind of a conflict of ideas, and the best ones will come out on top, hopefully, right?
Yeah, it's not even that, but I think my impression is, having come back to Australia after living overseas for a long time, this is a bit controversial perhaps, but I think a lot of it comes down to ego, because there is such a small community in Australia. And people do feel threatened when their ideas are challenged, which I think is a bit silly, because we're all smart, we're all adults, we all have things to contribute to the debate, and why don't we just have fun and exchange ideas and see what everyone else thinks? I think it's fun. It's healthy. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's important, it's fun, and I think everyone who's part of that community wants the right thing, right?
Yes.
They want Australia to be safe. They want Australia to be economically successful. There's different approaches that you can discuss to doing those things. And it's shaped by the Australian people. It's shaped by the strategic environment. It's shaped by those who want to do us harm. And we just need to come up with the right answer there.
Absolutely. No. And look, it's I'll throw in a very quick anecdote. I found it really interesting and ironic when I heard that Bridge was reviewing AUKUS. I'm like, Bridge launched my book on Australia and the Bomb 10 years ago at the Woodrow Wilson Centre.
Yep.
Hopefully that gives us some brownie points.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, he's a bit caught right now, I'm guessing, because from what I hear, and this will be released probably in the next few days, there is a new national military strategy coming out of the U.S. that will highly emphasize kind of turning to the Western Hemisphere and homeland security, potentially at the expense of doing things in Europe and the Indo-Pacific. And Bridge is very much of the group that wanted to really pivot and focus very hard on challenges in the Indo-Pacific. And so it'll be interesting to see how this AUKUS review plays out and how it fits into any new national military strategy that comes out in the U.S.
Absolutely. You and I have been watching our space in the Asia Pacific, the Indo-Pacific, for quite some time, but it is kind of, everyone likes to say, well, it's a pivotal moment in history, but it kind of is. But it's been going on for a while. I mean, China's been modernizing since the 80s. If you look at it from a historical perspective, but Australia really is at a very interesting time in its history. How it thinks about its existence, its security, who we are as a nation. It's a really interesting time.
Yeah. And look, when I first got here, Australia was very carefully walking that tightrope of how can we keep getting money from China, yet keep getting our security from the U.S. And that broke a little bit during COVID. I've written on this for an Italian journal, and I actually can't even read it because it got translated into Italian at the end. But there was that tightrope walk, and then China was not happy about some of the things Australia said about the sources of COVID and calling for an international investigation, along with other things like Huawei and stuff like that. And China kind of hit Australia upside the head with economic coercion. And this caused Australia to kind of reorganize its priorities and turn to the U.S. and make this AUKUS agreement. And now we're moving back to the tightrope. We're sitting on that tightrope. We're still reliant upon China for a lot of economic activity by shipping them raw goods, but heavily reliant on the U.S. for security. So will that continue? Open question. And that's why this meeting with President Trump and Prime Minister Albanese is so important. And will that continue, or will there be claims that Australia isn't doing enough on its side of that alliance? We will see. We will see, right?
Yeah, we will see. And, I guess a lot of countries will see. I think we mentioned briefly, I think we're running out of time, but we mentioned briefly, you and I, the US changing its name to the Department of War as opposed to the Department of Defense. But that reminded me, I have no views on that, but it reminded me the French did that in 2017. They changed it from the Ministère de la Défense to the Ministry of the Armies. But that, what you prompted me to think about was a lot of countries are rethinking or adjusting their thoughts about the US as an ally, I guess. So Australia's not alone in this, but it is, it's a quite interesting situation for Australia.
Yeah, exactly. And the U.S. is asking other nations to pick up more of the burden, which may be fair, but to totally walk away from the game on short notice will change a lot of dynamics and could cause our common adversaries to think differently about how they approach problems that they wish to solve, be it in Ukraine or in Taiwan or in other places.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So really great to be back with you here, Christine. Thanks to Kimberly, our producer, for coming back and joining us again. And really important that we got back on the air just to help kind of light a spark back under this public debate that needs to happen. So that closes out our discussion today around the importance of public debate around defense and national security issues. Very happy you joined Christine and me here at our triumphant return to Deterrence Down Under. I'd like to encourage you to subscribe to the show, review the podcast, and we're going to get back on a regular basis. So that will help others find us. Lastly, just have a great day, and remember to always think deterrence. Thank you for listening to Deterrence Down Under. Please take a minute to review the podcast, as your reviews help our podcast reach more listeners and expand the debate about strategic issues facing Australia and the region. Our show is made possible by the NIDS Podcasting Network, a division of the National Institute for Deterrence Studies. NIDS is a U.S.-based 501c3 organization that relies upon donations to produce this podcast and spread awareness of the peacekeeping value of U.S. strength, alliances, and deterrence. You can find a wide range of NIDS podcasts at thinkdeterrence.com. If you have any questions or feedback, feel free to send us an email at ddu@thinkdeterrence.com. I would like to thank our producer, Kimberly Charrington, and our sponsors, and all the amazing members of the National Institute for Deterrence Studies for making this podcast possible.
The NIDS Podcasting Network.